Hi, I'm Gal Pastor. In preparation for the Day of the Dead, or All Saints' Day, and yes, even Halloween, we're taking a closer look into specific biblical mourning practices, the outward manifestations of grief, of loss, or tragedy.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold.
I'm hoping that this close analysis would help you in your journey of processing grief and pain, and that as we identify the common elements that supersede time and cultures, you would perhaps consider appropriating these rituals in your own mourning process. I've mentioned previously that there seems to be a somewhat flexible progression in these rituals, starting with the garments ripping to then other expressions. Today, we look at the role and use of ashes in mourning. Again, we only have to look at the poor, wrecked, bereaved Tamar to know that the outward expression of mourning in ashes is practiced by men and women of the Bible. We note that the ashes appropriation is sometimes done alone, but most of the instances record that the ritual is public. Others are present or participating. The Roman culture contemporary to the biblical world also used ashes in expression of grief, with mourners expected to dirty their faces. So the usage of ashes in mourning passed from both Jewish and Roman culture into early Christianity, when marking the head with ashes became a sign of penitence, the practice formalized in the Middle Ages. And so when we hear the word ashes, of all the symbols of grieving that biblical rituals utilize, this is the most religiously familiar one. We know what it feels like to have ashes, although mixed in oil, not dry, smeared on our foreheads once a year on Ash Wednesday, and we know that the words they are paired with are meant to remind us of our finite makeup. From dust you have come, to dust you will return. Outside of the specifically religious significance, cremation in our modern Western life is overtaking the traditional burying practices of a body in a casket in the ground. We keep our loved ones' ashes in an urn in a special place, or scatter them in a meaningful way.
The dwarfs of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep. In hollow halls beneath the fells.
The Bible uses words ash and dust seemingly interchangeably as synonyms to describe the practice or the sentiment of mourning or repentance, although the word ash is used more frequently. The words are similar in Hebrew, afar and ephah, and sometimes they are used together, combined for the sake of doubled emphasis. Job's cry of mourning illustrates that well. God has thrown me into the mud. I am nothing more than dust and ashes. There is a nuanced difference in the origin and meaning of each. In the ancient world, the military practice of burning enemy cities to the ground was prevalent, so the ashes signify death first and foremost. They illustrate destruction and ruin as from fire and war, a complete waste, end of existence. They are as such a very appropriate symbol of human mortality in that culture. Ashes are plentiful in that context in ordinary life as well as at the temple, as a remnant of the sacrificial burnt offerings. It is interesting to note that in rabbinic literature, ashes were sprinkled on the groom during the wedding ceremony in order to remind him at the peak of his life's enjoyment of the destruction of Jerusalem. With the same intent of reminding the Jews of their tumultuous past, ashes are on some occasions sprinkled on top of their bread. It's kind of like inducing sprinkling anxiety with the religious bent, remembering things were once bad and they can get bad again. Dust, of course, is omnipresent in that deserty Middle Eastern terrain and climate where it was daily trampled under one's feet. It represents finely attenuated matter, a minute thing, refuse, a bit. Dust is an apt metaphor for weakness and ephemerality. Are you getting what I'm saying yet? No? More? Okay. Symbolism of dust and ashes. Dryness, minuteness, insignificance, nothingness, destruction, desolation, devastation, annihilation, and extinction. Now, even with the use of ashes, there is a progression or just variations from just sitting on a pile of ashes to putting them on the head to spreading them over the entire body, and even in some cases to rolling your body through the ashes. The psalmist talks about even eating ashes as a metaphor for absolute utter suffering. I'm choking just talking about it. Nowhere in the Bible is eating ashes actually practiced as part of any repentance or mourning rituals. Yet it is a powerful picture, further illuminated for us by the possible influence of the Babylonian myth, Descent of Ishtar, in which ashes are actually the nourishment of those who dwell deep down in the underworld. When in the biblical narratives one is overwhelmed with grief over death or tragedy, this is the physical substance, ash or dust, that one then surrounds herself with as closely as possible. Head, body, every inch of it is sometimes covered in order to communicate closeness to the state of being associated with that substance. This is not only a metaphor of devastation and death. The physicality of the entire ritual is also important, remember? The thing that helps us comprehend this practice is that the posture of the body is an essential element here. One would never stand doing this, it appears to me, from the accounts that we have. Never. The point is lowering your body as close to the ground as possible, either sitting or prostrated or rolling on the ground. I can't even remember the last time I sat down on the bare ground, not on hardwood or carpet or a blanket. Can you? I think we can try to imagine the significance of posture. If you have ever received ashes on your forehead, you were probably standing at that time, perhaps in some instances kneeling. Now imagine receiving them on your forehead, prostrated fully on the ground, while the accompanying words are likening you to dust. It makes a world of difference, the posture of the body does, communicating meaning. This is where our biblical mourner is. He is sinking down, physically, emotionally, and metaphorically. It's well expressed in Lamentations. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have thrown dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground.
With your downward posture and your body partially or fully covered in dust or ashes, you're making a very strong statement about your inner state of utter vulnerability. It's almost like a dramatic play is being enacted here. You're signifying that you've reached rock bottom. You have met death. It has visited you and made you a believer. It took your innocence away, left you utterly powerless and defeated, and its finger marked you with nothingness all over. Death signed its victory over you in ashes. Remember how in the first video of garments ripping we talked about certain dehumanization in the process? I think we've reached the end of it here, accomplished. You had to tear your clothing to get here. You had to put on a coarse grain bag. Now you yourself are that attenuated matter, the tiniest particle of the earth. Rolling in ashes seems to me a symbol of identification with your dead one as well. A real heartbreaking gesture of a desperate desire to join them right this very second. May the desolation come over me and cover me. The act almost feels like the bereaved's own burial. But here is the thing. Though the biblical use of ashes imagery centers primarily on the fragility of life, the temple ashes were used also under certain circumstances in purification rituals to wash those who are unclean. The virtue or a higher status of ashes in that case is derived from the sacred material of the offering. Wait, so I'm saying that the ashes signify desolation and nothingness, but are also somewhat of a consecrated matter when connected to sacrifices? How can one item represent two seemingly contrasting things? Well, if you have ashes of your loved ones, you know that they are precious to you, even as they are realistically a very minor substance. So, what am I saying? When the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery talks about ashes, it says, this aspect of sacrificial cleansing transforms the symbolism emphasized by ashes from one of potential pessimism into one of humble hope. They worded that carefully enough, but I'm not here to say even that. It is absolutely not my goal here to offer you a shortcut through grief. From pessimism to hope, in a blink of an eye. There, trust in God and everything will be fine again. I've observed and felt too much of grief to know there is no shortcut to happiness in God in the aftermath. What I am doing here is dissecting these rituals into imagery and meaning and sharing my observations with you. And what I have pointed out all along in these videos is that these rituals of grief are not cutting God out, quite the contrary. The biblical narratives note for us that after the sackcloth and ashes, in many instances, prayer and worship followed. In that sense, the ritual itself, even as it symbolizes rock bottom, there is nowhere lower to go, reaches for God, tentatively turns upwards from the pit. Ashes are then both the symbol of desolation as well as a consecrated by pain message to God, declaring that you now get it. You feel the humanity's deadly destiny in your bones. I'm thinking of the poignant verse at the end of the Psalm 22. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive. The ritual is then despair signaling to God, both heart-wrenching and holy. Like with the sackcloth, here as well we note that the prophetic language, rich in imagery, has God understanding fully the significance of these rituals and intervening on behalf of those in grief by handling personally the symbols of pain. We read in Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me. He has sent me to provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair." See how the prophet utilizes contrasting images to paint the whole picture. Opposite of dry ashes, on the head is a crown of beauty. And of course the picture of anointment with oil instead of dry, desolate state. That Jesus selects exactly this Old Testament passage to inaugurate and describe his ministry blows my mind. So go ahead and signal. Jesus became incarnate in order to enter your mourning ritual to identify the spirit of despair and provide for those who grieve.
The flying stars on crowns they hung, the dragonfly in twisted wire, they match the light of moon and sun.